The Wyoming wind, a relentless and savage beast, scoured the high street of Solitude's End with an edge of pure malice. It was a cold that bit deep, sharp enough to make the hardiest of men turn their collars up and curse the day. Asher Thorne, a man carved from the very rock and solitude of the wilderness, strode through the deserted town, his breath pluming in the frigid air. Behind him, his pack horse, loyal and steady, followed with its head bowed against the gale. Snow, as fine and dry as bone dust, swirled across the frozen earth. For 15 years, Asher had built a life on his remote ranch, nestled deep in the shadow of the unforgiving peaks. It was a life deliberately chosen for its distance from the company of men, from the whispers and accusing stares, and most of all, from the haunting memory of a past that had nearly seen him dangle from a hangman's noose for a crime he did not commit. He had been a boy then, framed for the death of a corrupt deputy, and only a desperate escape into the wilderness had saved him. Towns, with their gossiping tongues and long memories, were the last places on earth he ever wanted to be. But the brutal reality of a Wyoming winter cared nothing for a man's preferences. Survival was a harsh master, and his supplies were dwindling. He needed to provision himself if he hoped to see the spring thaw. As he walked, the few souls brave enough to face the storm's fury stared from behind frosted windows or the relative warmth of sheltered doorways. Their whispers followed him, clinging to him like his own shadow. "That's Thorne," a voice hissed from the warmth of the town's only saloon, the one with the ranch out past Shadow Canyon. "They say he's a killer." Asher's jaw tightened into a line as hard as granite, his gaze fixed on the mercantile ahead. He had learned long ago, in the unforgiving theater of the West, that a rumor could travel faster and hit harder than a .45 slug. The truth was a currency few people cared to trade in. His reputation as a dangerous recluse was a wall he had built around himself, and most days, it served him well. Today, it felt like a shroud. He was about to step onto the boardwalk in front of Thompson's Mercantile when a flicker of movement in the adjacent alleyway snagged his attention. It was a quick, furtive motion, almost lost in the blinding swirl of snow. Asher's hand, a calloused and practiced extension of his will, instinctively drifted to the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his hip. His senses screamed of danger, of an ambush, a threat lurking in the shadows. But as he focused, the source of the movement resolved itself, and the tension in his shoulders eased, replaced by something far more complicated. It was not a threat. It was a girl, a young Chinese woman, no older than 20 at most. She was desperately, frantically sifting through a heap of frozen trash, her movements sharp with the nervous energy of a cornered animal. Her traditional cheongsam, made of thin, worn silk, was a tragic absurdity in the face of the relentless cold. It offered no protection. Her fingers were raw, cracked, and bleeding. Snowflakes clung to the dark silk of her hair like cruel jewels as she pulled a frozen, discarded half-loaf of bread from the pile. She clutched it to her chest as if it were a solid gold nugget, a treasure beyond price. Asher found himself moving toward the alley, a silent, almost involuntary pull. He couldn't say why. He had spent a decade and a half turning his back on the world and its troubles. Yet, something about her held him fast. Perhaps it was the defiant set of her shoulders, a posture that radiated a fierce pride even in the depths of degradation. Perhaps it was the gnawing, ghost-like memory of his own past hunger, of days spent on the run with nothing but cold air in his belly. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something in her dark, almond-shaped eyes that reminded him of a younger, more desperate version of himself, frightened, hunted, but too proud to ever ask for help. For months, the silence of his cabin had been growing louder. The solitude that had once been his shield now felt like a prison. He was weary of his own company, of the ghosts that were his only companions. He had come to town not just for flour and salt, but for a connection, for something to break the crushing weight of his isolation. He'd even entertained the foolish, desperate notion of seeking a wife, a partner to share the burden of his existence. He had seen the advertisements in old newspapers, the lonely hearts of ranchers seeking mail-order brides. He had always scoffed at them, but the recent loneliness had been a different kind of beast. He stepped into the mouth of the alley, the wind howling around him. The girl spun around at his approach, her back hitting the cold brick wall with a soft thud. Her eyes were sharp, wary, and filled with a profound mistrust that he knew all too well. She held the frozen bread like a weapon, her body coiled, ready to flee. Asher had rehearsed 1,000 different introductions in his mind on the long ride into town, all of them gruff and inadequate. Now, faced with this desperate reality, they all felt like lies. He thought of his empty cabin, the 2 chairs at his table, the years stretching out before him, as empty and cold as the winter landscape. The words that came out were not the ones he intended, but they were the ones his lonely heart offered. They were blunt, clumsy, and raw. "Will you come home with me?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, rough from disuse. The girl's expression shifted with breathtaking speed. First, a flicker of sheer, uncomprehending shock. Then, a flare of white-hot anger that burned away the fear. Finally, it all settled into a kind of dark, bitter humor, a weary resignation that spoke of 1,000 similar insults. She lifted her chin, her gaze locking with his, a wall of ice between them. "A cage is a cage, no matter how warm," she said, her voice quiet but laced with steel. "And my future is not for sale." The word struck Asher with the force of a physical blow. He froze, the wind knocked out of him. That wasn't what he had meant. He wasn't trying to purchase her, to own her like livestock. He was offering a lifeline, a partnership, a way out for both of them. But in that terrible, clarifying moment, he understood exactly what she had heard. He saw himself through her eyes, a large, intimidating man, scarred by the wilderness, making a crude proposition to a vulnerable woman. It was the same vile offer that countless other men had likely thrown her way. His face burned with a shame he hadn't felt in years. He slowly, deliberately, raised his hands in a gesture of peace, showing they were empty. "I meant no disrespect, miss," he said, his tone softening, losing its rough edge. "That came out all wrong. I live alone. It's a hard life. I'm not a man for fancy words. I was offering a home. Shelter. A partnership, not a prison." He gestured down the street. "There's a diner just there, O'Malley's. They serve a hot beef stew. It's a good meal, and it's warm inside. Please, let me buy you a meal. That's all. No more talk of anything else. Just a hot meal." She stared at him, her dark eyes searching his face, trying to divine the truth hidden beneath his weathered, rugged exterior. She was trying to peel back the layers of rumor and reputation and see the man beneath. "Why?" she asked, her voice still quiet, but the single word was heavy with the weight of her suspicion. "Because I know what it is to be hungry," he answered honestly, the memory a bitter taste in his mouth. "And I know what it is to be on the run. To have the whole world looking at you like you're something to be stamped out." For a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, the hardness in her eyes softened. A flicker of understanding, of shared experience, passed between them. She wasn't convinced, not by a long shot, but perhaps she saw something other than a predator in his gaze. "The men who are looking for me are not the kind to give up," she said, and it was both a confession and a warning. "Neither are the blizzards in these parts," Asher replied, a grim smile touching his lips. "And I'm still here." A ghost of a smile touched her own lips in return. It was a fragile, fleeting thing, but it was there. They walked to O'Malley's diner together, though she stayed close to the buildings, her eyes constantly scanning the street, the rooftops, every shadow. Inside, the diner was warm and smelled of coffee and fried bacon. Asher chose a corner table, one that gave them a clear, unobstructed view of the door. She sat stiffly, a coiled spring of tension, as if expecting danger to burst in at any second. "Leanne," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, melodic, a stark contrast to the harsh world outside. "Asher Thorne," he replied. "I know who you are," she said, her gaze steady. "They say you killed a lawman." "They say a lot of things," Asher answered, his voice even, betraying no emotion. "Most of them are wrong." The stew arrived, thick and steaming, filled with chunks of beef, potatoes, and carrots. It was a king's feast. Leanne tried to eat slowly, to maintain her composure, her dignity. But every spoonful she took was a desperate testament to her starvation. Asher looked away, giving her the small dignity of privacy, and sipped his bitter black coffee. Just then, the diner door swung open, letting in a blast of frigid air and a cloud of swirling snow. 3 men stepped inside, their boots heavy on the wooden floorboards, their faces colder and harder than the wind they'd left behind. They wore long duster coats, and the way they moved spoke of a casual violence. The man in the lead was tall and thin, with a prominent, jagged scar that twisted his mouth into a permanent sneer. His pale, cold eyes swept the room with an air of predatory ownership and landed squarely on Leanne. She froze, the spoon trembling in her hand, the color draining from her face. "Well, well," the scarred man drawled, his voice like gravel scraping on stone. "Miss Leanne, you've led us on quite a chase." "I don't know you," Leanne said, her voice barely a whisper, her shaking hands betraying the terror she felt. "Oh, I think you do," the man retorted, taking a step closer. "You knew Mr. Way. And you took some papers from him. Papers he never should have had. Papers our employer, Baron Drake, is very keen to get back." Leanne's spoon clattered onto the table. Before she could respond, before the fear could completely swallow her, Asher spoke. His voice was calm, conversational, but it carried an unmistakable weight that cut through the tension in the room. "Let the lady finish her meal in peace." The scarred man's glare shifted to Asher, his eyes narrowing. "This ain't your concern, rancher. Walk away now, and you might live to see the spring." "It is now," Asher replied, his hand resting casually on the table, just inches from the butt of his Colt. "Is that a threat?" the man sneered, his own hand drifting towards his gun. His 2 companions fanned out, their expressions grim. "No," Asher said, his eyes as cold and gray as chips of ice. "It's a statement of fact. You boys decide to draw your guns in here, someone's going to die. It might be you. It might be me. But I promise you, it won't be pretty. Now, get out." The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. The tension was a palpable thing, thick and heavy in the air. The scarred man stared at Asher, weighing him, judging him. He saw no fear in Asher's eyes, only a cold, deadly certainty. Finally, he let out a short, harsh laugh. "This isn't over, Thorn." "It usually ain't," Asher agreed. They watched the men leave, their dark shapes disappearing into the swirling snow. But Asher knew they wouldn't go far. They would be waiting, like wolves circling a wounded deer. "We need to move," he said quietly to Leanne. "Now." "Through the kitchen, out the back." "Where would we go?" she asked, her voice laced with a despair that tore at him. "They will find me anywhere." "I have a ranch," he said, his gaze firm. "Up past Shadow Canyon. It's warm, it's safe, and it's damn hard to find." "They won't find you there." "And the price?" she whispered, her pride, that fierce, unbroken thing, still intact. "No price," Asher said gently, meeting her gaze. "Just an offer of a safe harbor. A chance. For both of us." Leanne looked towards the front window, where danger lurked in the blizzard, then back at the strange, solitary man who had just risked his life for her. She saw the truth in his eyes, the honesty of his offer. She gave a single, decisive nod. They slipped out the back just as the snow began to fall in earnest, the thick, heavy flakes already working to cover their tracks. Asher helped Leanne onto his pack horse, settling her in front of him before mounting his own saddle horse. They rode towards the dark, looming silhouette of the mountains, a wall of rock and shadow against the churning gray sky. Behind them, carried on the wind, they could hear the faint, angry sound of men shouting and mounting their own horses. They were being followed, and the storm was closing in, a white curtain descending upon the world. The snow fell in a thick, blinding curtain as Asher guided his horse up the treacherous mountain path. The storm was no longer just weather, it felt like a physical force, a malevolent entity trying to push them back down into the valley, back into the hands of their pursuers. Leanne held on tight, her thin clothing no match for the biting, penetrating cold. Asher could feel her shivering violently against his back. He shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her, ignoring the immediate shock of the wind on his own body. "We're close," he shouted over the howling gale, though the words were nearly snatched away and lost in the roaring chaos. Leanne didn't reply, conserving what little energy she had left. Smart girl, Asher thought. The higher they climbed, the thinner and sharper the air became. The world was reduced to a swirling vortex of white. But Asher's horse was sure-footed, a creature of the high country, knowing this terrain by heart. It pushed onward through snow that was now nearly chest-deep. After what felt like an eternity, an endless struggle against the elements, the trees began to thin, and the dark, solid outline of Asher's cabin materialized against the white landscape. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, a welcome, beautiful sight that promised life and warmth. A wave of profound relief washed over him. For 15 long years, this small, sturdy cabin had been his sanctuary, his fortress of solitude. He prayed it would become hers as well. Inside, Leanne huddled by the roaring fire Asher quickly built, rubbing her hands together to restore feeling. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her eyes, wide and luminous in the firelight, slowly took in her surroundings. The cabin was Spartan but immaculately kept. A sturdy, hand-carved table and chairs stood in the center of the room. A rack of well-oiled rifles was mounted on one wall. The shelves along another were heavily laden with jars of preserved food, vegetables, salted meats, and fruits. It was a testament to a life of hard work and self-sufficiency. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "It's shelter," Asher said gruffly, though her words had warmed something inside him he wasn't ready to name. Once she had warmed through and her shivering had subsided, Asher handed her a steaming mug of pine needle tea, fragrant and sharp. Leanne drank it slowly, her eyes half closed. For the first time since he had met her, huddled and desperate in that frozen alleyway, she didn't look like she was ready to bolt. The tension had begun to melt from her shoulders. "You said the men after you won't give up," Asher said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Who are they? Who is Baron Drake?" Leanne set her mug down on the hearth and retrieved a worn, leather-bound folder from the small satchel she carried. It was the only thing she possessed in the world besides the clothes on her back. "I took these," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of her burden. "From Mr. Way, the man I worked for. He was a good man. An honest man." "What kind of papers?" Asher asked, his instincts telling him this was the heart of the matter. "The kind that men kill for." He opened the folder. Inside were survey maps, land deeds, legal correspondence, and financial ledgers. It was a meticulous collection of records, and for each property listed, there were 2 sets of documents, one real, one forged. Asher, a rancher himself, recognized the names of several local homesteaders, honest, hard-working men he'd had dealings with over the years. "You're saying these men, they stole this land?" he asked, a hard, angry edge creeping into his voice. "More than land," Leanne said, her eyes flashing with a righteous fire. "They stole mining claims, water rights, entire futures. My employer, Mr. Way, he was a clerk for the Territorial Land Office. He discovered the truth. He discovered the pattern, all leading back to one man. Baron Magnus Drake. He was building an empire on forged paper and stolen dreams. When Mr. Way confronted him, they made it look like he fell down a flight of stairs." A slow, hot anger began to build in Asher's chest. It was an old, familiar feeling. "And they blamed you?" "They were going to kill me too, to ensure my silence," she confirmed. "I ran. But there's no safe town for a Chinese girl alone. Word spreads. The Baron has men everywhere." She met his gaze, her own clear and steady. "Then you showed up." Before Asher could reply, a flicker of movement outside the window caught his eye, a shadow detaching itself from the snow-laden trees. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but in this wilderness, the smallest unnatural thing was a blaring alarm. He pressed a finger to his lips, and Leanne instantly froze, her training in survival as sharp as his own. Asher moved silently to a small firing slit he had carved into the cabin wall years ago, a relic of his early, more paranoid days. Through it, he saw them. 3 riders, moving with stealth and precision through the trees, their rifles held at the ready. "They found us," he whispered. Leanne's breath hitched. "What do we do?" "We stay quiet," Asher said, his voice a low growl. "They're just the scouts. The rest of them won't be far behind." The scouts circled the cabin, their movements precise and professional. They communicated with hand signals, not words. These were not common thugs. "Professionals," Asher muttered. "Ex-cavalry, by the looks of it." "Will they attack tonight?" Leanne asked, her voice trembling slightly, the fear she had kept at bay returning. "No," Asher said, his mind racing, calculating. "They'll wait for reinforcements. They'll wait for their master. They'll want overwhelming numbers. They think we're trapped." For the remainder of the day, as the storm outside began to taper off, Asher and Leanne worked to fortify the cabin. They barricaded the door with heavy logs, filled every available bucket and pot with water in case of fire, and strategically placed ammunition and rifles within easy reach. Asher showed her the cabin's hidden defenses, the escape tunnel hidden beneath a trapdoor in the root cellar, the reinforced window shutters, the best places to shoot from. As they worked, a silent rhythm developed between them. Leanne proved to be quick-witted and steady-handed. She didn't complain or falter, learning the cabin's layout and its defensive capabilities faster than Asher could have anticipated. "You've handled a gun before," Asher observed, watching her expertly check the action on a Winchester rifle. "My father taught me how to shoot," Leanne replied, her expression somber. "He said a woman on her own in this country must know how to protect herself from the wolves." "He was a smart man," Asher said quietly. As night fell, an eerie, unnatural silence descended upon the mountains. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Asher and Leanne stood watch in shifts. She took the back window, a shotgun resting across her lap, while Asher watched the front, his eyes scanning the dark, imposing tree line. The hours crawled by, each tick of the small mantel clock a drumbeat marking their dwindling time. Finally, Asher broke the silence, his voice low. "Tell me what happens if those papers don't get to the right people." Leanne's shoulders slumped, the weight of her quest momentarily overwhelming her. "Then nothing changes. Families will lose their ranches. Honest people will be ruined. And men like Baron Drake will continue to get richer and more powerful, swallowing everything in their path." "Drake," Asher repeated, the name tasting like poison. "He's the man behind it all. He's the one who created the forged documents that destroyed my family back in California," Leanne confirmed, a tremor of old pain in her voice. "He stole our farm. That's why Mr. Wei trusted me. He knew I had cause. Now, the Baron is here, doing the same thing on a grander scale." A cold rage, familiar and sharp, coiled in Asher's gut. This was not some abstract fight for justice anymore. It was personal. He's the one leading them. "He wants me dead," Leanne said, her voice quiet but firm. "And he wants those papers destroyed." Asher nodded slowly, a grim certainty settling over him. "Then we won't let him have either." The night wore on, a long, tense vigil. Around midnight, a faint sound carried on the wind. A low whistle, like a signal. Asher stiffened. "They're here," he said. Leanne moved to his side, her presence a small, steady warmth in the cold room. "How many?" "More than we can handle in a straight fight," Asher admitted, his voice grim. "They won't attack just yet. They're surrounding us, cutting off any escape. They'll wait for dawn." Leanne took a deep breath, her courage a tangible thing. "Asher, if you want to leave, through the tunnel. I won't blame you. This isn't your fight." He turned to face her, the firelight casting dancing shadows on his rugged features. His gaze was unwavering. "I'm not leaving you, Leanne." The undisguised shock on her face told him that no one had ever said those words to her before. Before she could respond, the sharp, vicious crack of a rifle shot echoed through the night, shattering the silence. It was followed by another. A moment later, torches flared to life among the trees, a ring of fire closing in around them. The siege had begun. Asher chambered a round in his Winchester and glanced at Leanne. "You ready?" She nodded, her expression resolute, the fear replaced by a steely determination. "Ready." Outside, men began shouting orders as they took their positions around the cabin. Asher stepped up to the firing slit, his shoulders squared, a man defending his home and the woman who had, against all odds, found her way into it. "Then let's make them wish they'd never come." The first grey light of dawn was just beginning to touch the snow-covered peaks when the main assault began. Asher felt it before he heard it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a heavy, expectant silence that precedes violence. Then, a single commanding voice, dripping with arrogance and authority, cut through the frigid morning air. "Asher Thorne. You have a woman in there who is a thief and a fugitive. Send her out, along with the document she stole." Leanne's breath caught in her throat. "It's him. The Baron." Baron Magnus Drake stepped out from behind the cover of the trees. He was dressed not in practical winter gear, but in a pristine, tailored suit, his boots polished to a high shine as if he were on a parade ground rather than leading an attack on a remote mountain cabin. More than a dozen men fanned out behind him, their rifles raised. Asher brought his own rifle up but held his fire. "Send out the girl and the papers, Thorne!" Drake yelled, his voice echoing in the still morning air. "Do that, and I give you my word as a gentleman, you can walk away from this." Leanne shook her head, her eyes wide with a fear born of experience. "He's lying. He'll kill us both." Asher didn't bother responding to Drake. He answered her instead. "We're not surrendering. Not ever." A volley of gunshots erupted, the bullets thudding into the thick log walls of the cabin, sending splinters flying. Asher returned fire, his shot precise and deadly, dropping a man who was attempting to rush the cabin from the left. Leanne moved to a firing panel at the back, her own shots measured and controlled. Reloading, she called out. "Covering!" Asher yelled back, firing a few rapid shots towards her side to keep their attackers at bay. The small cabin shuddered under the relentless barrage of bullets. Soon, a new threat emerged. Acrid smoke began to seep through the gaps between the logs. "They're trying to burn us out," Leanne said, her voice tight with alarm. Asher grabbed a bucket of water and doused the smoking wall. "It means they're getting desperate. It means we're hurting them." The gunfire intensified. The cabin was well built, a fortress of timber and stone, but Asher knew that no fortress could withstand a determined siege indefinitely. A torch arced through the air, landing on the snow-dusted roof with a soft thud and a sizzle. Leanne started for another bucket of water, but Asher grabbed her arm. "Stay back. It's a trick to draw you out." Another torch flew past the window, the smell of burning pitch filling the small space. Leanne coughed, her eye stinging from the smoke. "Asher, if the roof catches." "It's not going to," he said, his voice grim as he kicked open a heavy trapdoor in the floor. "Root cellar. We can fight from there. Go." They descended into the cramped, dark space just as the smoke above them grew thick and suffocating. Asher moved to a hidden firing slit near ground level, a narrow opening that gave him a clear shot at the feet and legs of anyone who got too close. Leanne took up a position at another. She fired first, and a pained grunt from outside told her she had hit her target. Their attackers were growing impatient. Orders were shouted, and the sound of boots crunching in the snow grew louder, closer. "They're rushing the cabin!" Asher yelled. He fired rapidly, dropping one man while Leanne took down another. But still they came, a relentless tide of violence. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. A new sound filled the valley, a sound that made the hair on Asher's arm stand on end. It was the thunder of approaching horses, and not from Drake's men. A fierce, ululating cry echoed off the canyon walls, a sound of pure, unbridled warfare. Leanne's eyes widened. "Who is that?" "Friends," Asher said, a wave of profound, bone-deep relief washing over him. "Old friends. Through the swirling smoke and chaos, Asher could see them, riders pouring into the clearing from the north, a band of native warriors, men Asher had aided years ago when a harsh winter had left their people starving. They were led by Iron Hawk, his powerful voice rising above the chaos, directing his warriors with deadly efficiency. Drake's men turned, their expressions a mixture of confusion and sheer panic. They were not prepared for a fight on two fronts. "Now!" Asher shouted. He kicked open the cellar's emergency exit, a small, hidden door on the far side of the cabin, grabbed Leanne's hand, and pulled her out into the blinding snow. They ran low, using the pandemonium as cover. Men were scrambling everywhere, some firing wildly at the new arrivals, others diving for cover. One of Drake's men saw Leanne and raised his rifle. Asher didn't hesitate. He fired from the hip, and the man crumpled to the ground. "Come on," he yelled. They reached the tree line just as a rider galloped past. "Thorn!" Iron Hawk shouted, reining in his war pony. "This way!" Asher swung Leanne up onto the horse, then climbed on behind her. Iron Hawk seized the reins, kicked his heels into the horse's flanks, and they bolted up a narrow, hidden trail. Bullets whizzed past them, but Iron Hawk's warriors returned fire, providing a screen of covering fire for their retreat. Within minutes, the cabin and the firefight were far below, swallowed by the smoke and confusion. Hours later, they reached a hidden ridge, high in the mountains, safe for the moment. Leanne slid off the horse, her legs trembling so badly she nearly collapsed. Asher caught her, his hand steady on her arms. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. Her breath came in ragged clouds in the cold air. "You saved me." "You saved yourself," he corrected her gently. "I just provided a distraction." She looked back at the plume of black smoke rising in the distance, a funeral pyre for his home. "Your home?" Asher followed her gaze. The cabin that had been his refuge and his prison for 15 years was gone. He let out a long, slow breath, a feeling of loss mingled with an unexpected sense of liberation. Cabins can be rebuilt. Lives can't. Leanne stepped closer and placed a hand on his chest, over his heart. "I'm so sorry, Asher." He covered her hand with his own, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "It was worth it. You are worth it." Her eyes, when they met his, were filled with a warmth and a light that he hadn't seen in anyone's for a long, long time. "Where do we go now?" she whispered. "Somewhere safe," Asher said, his resolve hardening. "Then we find a lawman who's not on Drake's payroll. A federal marshal. Someone who can use those papers to bring the Baron down for good." Leanne nodded, her expression fierce. "I'll stand with you." A faint smile touched Asher's lips. "I wasn't planning on standing without you." Below them, Iron Hawk and his warriors were regrouping, ready to guide them through mountain passes no militia could ever hope to find. Leanne leaned her head against Asher's shoulder, a gesture of trust that felt more profound than any words. For the first time since he'd found her in that alley in Solitude's End, she wasn't running from something. She was moving towards something. Towards a future. The snow began to fall again, soft and silent, as if the mountains themselves were offering a blessing, a clean slate. Asher wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close against the cold. "You told me my home would be just another cage," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "I was wrong," Leanne said, a small smile playing on her lips as she looked up at him. "You didn't offer me a cage. You offered me a chance." She paused, her gaze searching his. "Your offer, to come home with you. Was it just for shelter?" Asher looked out over the vast, wild Wyoming landscape, a land scarred by violence but still breathtakingly beautiful. He felt something shift deep inside him, something that had been locked away for a very long time. "No," he said softly, honestly. "It wasn't just for shelter. I was tired of being alone." He met her eyes, his heart in his throat. "The offer still stands, Leanne. Not as a matter of price or convenience, but as a partnership. In all things." A genuine, radiant smile broke across her face, transforming her. "Then my answer is yes." He looked out at the endless horizon. Maybe he didn't have to be the lone rancher anymore. Maybe he never really did. "Then let's go," he said softly, his voice full of a hope he hadn't felt in 15 years. "We've got a future to fight for." Together, they turned and walked down the ridge, ready for whatever came next.